Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 9.1, the Apex is Superb. We're in Arc 9. This is unbelievable.
That's right. And if you guys are at this point, then, well, you remember what happened last time.
I would hope so.
I don't need no recap. I do have to say, though, I came to a realization.
And
that realization is that Dragon could have saved Marie if he had Gemini worlded the venom or her needles or anything, but he didn't. He just watched it happen because he thought she was a monster. And
but it
Dragon
permeated her cells. What are you talking about? How's he going to
anything
do
I like
cellular
about
surgery?
Oh, fuck off! He records all trillions of his cells. Like,
yeah,
it's
but how's he gonna sort them? Like, this one's good, this one's not, this one's good, this one's not. How's he gonna?
He could have done it. He's a cogitant, is he now?
I can see the individual atoms. I can see that's a bad one.
Yeah, it's not that precise to see what a bad cell is, because a cell is not a little atom. It's like a bunch of stuff.
Okay, you can eyeball it too then.
Yeah, you can eyeball if you're Dragon.
We have Deadeye.
Deadeye, yeah. He could have done it, but he didn't.
We're still in the Red Dead Redemption phase of inexplicable sort of obsessions.
Oh. Yeah, but we have to read this now, so I have to get out of it.
Get into Aetheral brain.
Oh, that's right. This is my Aetheral space. Once, a long time ago, the galaxy found itself in an era of war. Good men found themselves turned to evil purposes, and even the faithful devout pointed their blades to each other. Why is the supreme administrator of this world? The children of the Superb said earnestly. He is a being to be admired and contacted. All else is blasphemy. Why is a state of being to be achieved? The children of the humble roared. Through simple lives and virtuous souls, we may all become as why. All else is blasphemy. Why is the kingdom that awaits us? Sneered the children of paradise. A garden yet to be built, free of all suffering and loss. It is the duty of the faithful to bring why into this world. All else is blasphemy.
Yes, there is a viewpoint sort of bias here.
You said sneered.
Yeah, I just mean like, but I mean like from the viewpoint of the writer. I mean.
Oh yes, their perspectives were irreconcilable, and for a grim time it seemed their feud might bring an end to the faith. But this was not the conclusion Y had devised. When all seemed lost, the Pontifex Maximilian stepped down from his throne, brought the 3 apex bishops to their knees, and demanded of them the following. None of us yet know what Y is, save that Y is perfection, and so to claim further knowledge of this is foolishness. Thus, I command you each to go your separate ways, and to worship Y as you know it, and to learn more of its true nature. Wrong, it's idiot. I'll fix it for you. And so you shall be superb, humble, and paradisian, but even then you shall also be friends in the same house. And so you will come back together every decade and speak of what you have learned. This way the faith shall slowly become perfected, and the truth shall slowly be revealed. And so this shall be the final church required by mankind. Aylin's Fables on the True Meat. You did not just give this guy the name I'm about to read out loud. You did not. Giovanni Sigma Testament, Apex Bishop of the Superbian branch of the Final Church, opened his eyes. Immediately, his mind was running at full capacity. No fatigue or malaise was permitted to plague him. He rose from his massive bed, big enough to fit 10 of him, threw the embroidered red quilt off of his body, and began his day. His chambers were just as massive as the furniture, intricate woodwork laced with gold winding around the room. Giovanni opened his wardrobe with mechanical efficiency, pulling out his ceremonial assemblage robe and beginning the complicated process of putting it on. Straps were tightened, buttons were clipped, laces were intricately threaded. He completed the process by pulling on the black gloves, fingers tipped with golden thimbles. All of this fit him perfectly. There was no surprise he had been created for his position, spawned to serve as Apex Bishop of the Superbians. It was a duty he took very seriously. A single glance at the mirror was enough to confirm he was ready. His pale face, eyes glinting red, looked back at him. His long, black hair, smooth and shadowed as the night, was such that it almost ran along the floor behind him, but that was the furthest it would grow. The black and red garb of the superbium apex bishop hung magnificently off his frame, all his body save his shoulders covered by the flowing dignity. The symbol of the superbian branch, a simple golden ring, lay over his collar. He reached out and adjusted it, but it had been perfect to begin with. It was no surprise that he would be anxious, though. This was going to be a very special day, after all. He strode through the sanctified halls of the Deus Nobiscum, his face grim. A window spanned the hallway, giving a grand view of the cathedral fleet amassing around the superbian flagship, preparing for the journey ahead. A red carpet softened his step, and statues of saints and martyrs passed, looked down at him impassively. Giovanni was flanked on either side by his dear companions. Are saints supposed to be capitalized? I'm curious. Interesting. There were countless warriors of the final church, who would have killed to serve Giovanni directly, but he trusted none of but these two for that task. They were loyal to him directly, not to the pomp and circumstance of the church. God, what should his voice be? Any suggestions?
It's fairly calm, I would
he's
say.
Important. The Vox Dei are with us, then? Giovanni asked, glancing up to his taller compatriot. Pablo nodded, his binder of cards tucked under his arm. With his free hand, he adjusted his glasses, a soft smile on his face. The captain of the Vox Dei has a dear nephew on Polis. He's eager to ensure the boy's safety. He will support us, without question. As are we all, Giovanni replied dutifully. In contrast to Giovanni's ceremonial garb, Pablo wore a simple black sweater and blue jeans, his worn sneakers slapping against the wooden floor. Even with the inevitable tension of the situation, his composed aspect went unmarred. As ever, his face seemed so relaxed that it seemed his eyes were permanently closed. I would get rid of... Yeah, you already know what's up. Tanhony, you get me. Occasionally, Giovanni would wonder if his friends slept while walking and talking. But the Vox Dei were with them, well and truly. That was the last piece of news Giovanni had needed to be assured in what happened next. The Vox Dei were the elite guard of the superbian faith, serving at the sides of the cardinals and aboard ships like this one. Without their support, today would not be possible. You remember your role as well? Giovanni asked, glancing down at his other bodyguard. Jamie nodded excitedly, his golden pigtails bouncing behind him as he walked. He wore the snow-white uniform of the quiet choir, the hem swishing as he walked. Giovanni often thought those clothes looked like pajamas more than anything else, but they were traditional. The twin shotguns slung over Jamie's back, however, were anything but. A feigned grin that was more than a little crazed opened his lips. I just follow your lead, right, Gio? You move first and we go from there. There was a deadly passion to him, but Giovanni knew he could follow orders. I feel like I made an assumption based on the pigtails, and it did not match what you wrote.
It kind of fits.
Should I change that? Okay, perfect. Not a step or a word until then, Giovanni confirmed. The party cannot commence until the music starts. There was an hour, 23 minutes, and 19 seconds until the ordained time. Giovanni found himself running through the possible scenarios in his head, over and over again, trying to cut off any complications before they could even arise. No matter how, I assume, many simulations he ran, however, his eventual victory went unaltered. God was with him. Is this True Meat about to turn into a shoot-off?
Well, sure.
Is that what I'm hearing right now?
Perhaps we'll find out more.
They passed through a truly massive set of sliding doors. That whole section of the ship was considered his personal quarters, after all, and entered the vessel proper. Tranquility came to an inevitable end. The quiet the trio had used to speak in was a very rare thing aboard the Deus Nobiscum. Before long, their group was surrounded by visitors and sycophants, all eager to pay their respects on the eve of the true meet, and gain the favor of the apex bishop, no doubt. The Vox Dei, wearing red robes over their black armor, plasma rifles clutched ready in their hands. A squad joined Giovanni's procession as he made his way through the ship. Their bright red spherical hats might have seemed a bit comical, but the killer instinct in their experienced eyes was anything but. The warband Nixia, massive, hulking pugnanta with heavy axes and clubs slung over their shoulders, kneeling in respect as Giovanni passed. Oh, I thought pugnanta was like a cool word for pugnance.
I might keep it, actually. That's pretty cool.
It's kind of dope. I like that.
That's because I was canon now. Traditional term.
One thumped their bare chests with a fist, grunting. In accordance with their traditional station, they had never learned to speak the quiet choir.
Oh, yeah, there's a full stop there.
Oh, I'm sorry. They had never learned to speak. The quiet choir, their singers smiling beatifically, beatifically. How do you say that smoothly?
Beatifically? I don't know. I can't do either.
Because I know it's beatific, but hold on. Let me Google it. This is important to me. I'm sorry. I have to halt the whole reading for this. How to pronounce. Come on, Google. We need to go faster. Beatifically. You're right. Thank you, Tan. Smiling beatifically and shaking Giovanni's hand with careful fingers more suited to strangling than diplomacy. One of their eyes flicked to Jamie, a sliver of professional disgust running through their eyes before fading. The fifth Clavinian hentopics of the shivering Polariovis. Fuck, dude. Shivering Polariovis. How do I say it? You say it.
There's a new word, so you decide right now how it is said.
The fifth Clavinian hentopics of the shivering Polariovis, their masked priests holding ceremonial tanks of fish and insects between their armored gauntlets. They merely stared silently. Those motherfuckers better have an acronym. They weren't even the strangest that joined their procession. The Grey Dawn, the Dirtish Hamfad, the Knights of Reason, the representative gathering of the little children, the Colleen Sisterhood, the Believers on Horseback based, the Silent Embrace. I think with sci-fi, often it gets a little bit in the silly names, but I love that Aetheral Space mixes like normal names with absurd names, so you kind of get like a little bit of both. Chivalric and esoteric orders, cults, and holy gatherings, players big and small. They all wanted to walk alongside their bespoke Apex Bishop. And finally, Isabel Pie Testament, sworn sister speaker of the higher advisor of the Superbian sect of the Final Church, bowed respectfully as her younger brother approached. Just from looking at the two of them, you could have believed them to be twins, save for a slightly thinner nose and a defective right eye. Blue rather than red in coloration. She was his spitting image. "Esteemed Apex Bishop," she said, her voice sweet and clear as a bell, "if we might speak privately." Giovanni stopped walking. The crowd that had accumulated jostled for position around them. Their voices hushed as they muttered to each other. To halt the Apex Bishop during his daily duties was unorthodox in the extreme. Giovanni knew more than one killer glare would be aimed at his genetic sibling for this. "Of course," he said, smiling humbly, bowing back. "The shepherd must make time for his flock, always." "As the flock must seek out the wisdom of the shepherd," Isabel answered dutifully. With a hand, she gestured towards the nearby observation chamber. "Shall we?" So, Apex Bishop, is there one for each sect, or is he like the guy?
There's 3 sects, 3 Apex Bishops.
Gotcha. Giovanni nodded, detaching himself from his entourage and accompanying her into the chamber. The stately doors, metal engraved with images of saints past, opened to receive them. Beyond the dark void of space awaited, populated in this case by the ships gathering for the true meet. From this position, they had a perfect view of the new millennium, a long and stretching war cruiser. As was traditional for ships built during that era, the front of the vessel had been sculpted into the visage of a prominent saint. Saint Timothy, in this case, patron of shipbuilders and peacemakers. His metal eyes looked dutifully out to the stars, forever blind and so forever perfect. Giovanni looked out at him, hands clasped in front of him. Normally these chambers were used for meditation, but he got the feeling that wasn't what Isabella intended. The doors slid shut, and Giovanni was immediately proven correct. Isabel's serene smile was replaced with a scowl, and she stepped forward confrontationally. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded. Giovanni raised an eyebrow. "I'm unsure of what you mean. I was walking, if I remember correctly, before you accosted me. Is that the issue?" "You know damn fucking well what the issue is!" she glared, her language utterly unsuited for the habit she wore. "What's this I'm hearing about you calling an assembly of the cardinals?" Giovanni smiled. "Well, I'm calling an assembly of the cardinals. I'm not sure what part of that confuses you." Isabel ran weary hands over her weary face. "Apex Bishop, if you please." Giovanni's eye twitched in annoyance. "As usual, you seem to have forgotten, but there is a rank difference between us. A certain level of respect is expected." She snorted. "I was there when you were still in a test tube. It'll be a cold day in hell before I acknowledge a rank difference between you and me." "It didn't seem so difficult for you back in the hallway." Giovanni allowed those words to go unspoken. No doubt all they would accomplish was extending this unwelcome interaction. Instead, he cut to the heart of the matter. "What exactly is it that you want, Isabella?" he asked, frowning in annoyance. "I have a very busy day ahead of me." "Oh yes, you've made sure of that," she said, waving her arms farcically. "The Apex Bishop serves at the pleasure of the Cardinals. You do realize you don't have the power to call them to assembly, don't you?" A smug smile crept across Giovanni's lips. "I've commanded them to meet with me, and they are meeting with me. It seems to me that I do have the power then. Unless you have opposing evidence." Needless to say, she didn't. Her body stiffened, and she looked away from him, her gaze instead fixed on the void outside, as empty as her argument. "This is about Polis, isn't it?" she finally asked. No point in hiding it. Giovanni strode forward, hands clasped statesmanlike behind his back, his head held nobly high. As he stood side by side with her, he couldn't help but take the slightest joy in noticing that he was an inch or so taller. "Of course it's about Polis," he replied. "Am I meant to simply ignore the suffering of our people?" "Cardinal Sarah has that situation well in hand," Isabella spoke through gritted teeth. "So he keeps saying. And yet, every time I look, it seems to me that the situation is very much not in hand. The people of Polis continue to be humiliated under the grip of a foreign and unworthy power." Isabella glanced sideways at him. "The Humanists aren't a foreign power. We're all part of the same final church. For now. And yet they refuse to return custody of Polis to us. What can this be but an act of aggression? We must show the Humanists we won't tolerate such insults. We won't tolerate such insults. I don't know why I said that so weird. We must show our people that we won't hesitate to protect them. Otherwise, what are we Superbiums but a mass of stories and traditions and empty air?" Her eyes narrowed. How? How do you intend to respond, then?" Giovanni reached out and placed a hand against the cool glass of the window, his palm covering the face of the watching saint. "That's what I will discuss with the Cardinals," he muttered. "Don't forget, I was created to lead our faith, sister. If I don't act in situations such as this, what is the purpose of my existence? I would be like you, a defective reject, jealous of the success that followed my failure." Again, the honest insult went unspoken. Giovanni turned to leave, the cloak of faithful humility already settling once again over his body and tongue. His shoes clicked against the polished floor. "Giovanni!" Isabella called after him. "Is it Isabel or Isabella?"
Isabella.
Okay. He turned to look back at her. For once, she seemed unable to find words, her mouth opening and closing once before she worked up the nerve. "Just don't do anything rash. The unity of the church is more important than anything." Giovanni's eyes narrowed hatefully, and he struck the wall behind him with such unenhanced force that it left a visible dent. Isabella took a careful step back. "If Brinkman has something to say to me," he snarled, "tell him to use his own mouth, not yours. Good day to you!" No more words passed between them. He swung back around, robe flapping in the air like a flag, and marched out of the chamber. The unity of the church was more important than anything? Oh, Brinkman, I couldn't agree more. Popcorn.
"And with this," Cardinal Williams said, rolling back up the scroll from which he just read his list of names, "I declare this assembly of the Cardinals and the Apex Bishop official, and all matters discussed within to be of the deepest confidentiality." With those last words, William gave a derisive glance to Pablo and Jamie, standing on either side of Giovanni's throne. No doubt he resented the fact that this meeting had been called at all. Like every other chamber on the Deus Nobiscum, this meeting room was steeped in history. It was here that the Urine Accords had been signed, where the Fell Beast Extermination Commission had been approved, where the execution of Apex Bishop Sunder had been decided. The aura of days past seemed to bleed through the red carpet, the antique long table, the 10 tall chairs gathered around it, and the resplendent throne that looked down from above. As Giovanni sat in it, chin resting on his fist, he felt as though he could feel the will of Apex Bishops gone by. William sat down, his bodyguards in black suits standing behind him protectively. During occasions like this, the Vox Day maintained a protective perimeter on the inside of the chamber itself, but the Cardinal's own staff handled their personal security. Curious, when Giovanni brought those loyal to him alone here, they were looked upon as trespassers, but there was no issue when a Cardinal did the very same thing. The hypocrisy was almost visible in the air. Williams returned to his seat at the Sorry, he sat down twice here. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, gotta fix that.
Williams steepled his hands before him. The white, braided beard of the old man was a stark contrast to his red robes, accentuated with gold lining.
What actually happened was like that glitch in a video game where a character starts to sit, then gets up, and then sits again. So that's what happened on screen. Exactly.
In the Superbian faith, any dictation by the Apex Bishop required the majority approval of the Council of Cardinals, the representatives of their master denominations. It had been that way since Apex Bishop Sunder, who had overstepped his bounds and shamed the sect as a result. But the resultant overcorrection had turned the balance of power all wrong. If the Apex Bishop required the approval of his lessers to act, he was no leader at all. At best, he was a figurehead. At worst, a puppet. The Cardinals looked to Williams, the most senior among them, for direction, and so the majority always went for what that man wanted. As things were now, he might as well have been sitting on Giovanni's throne. The Council is very interested, Williams began, the new irritation in his tone in utter contrast to his previous official reading, to know why you have called us here. You do not have the authority to call an assembly of the Cardinals, and yet you have come. My apologies for my willfulness, Giovanni replied, with none of the humility his words would imply. I am still young and adjusting to my position. All the same, there is a great deal for us to discuss, honoured Cardinals. With the true meet imminent, I thought it best for us to establish our positions beforehand. Indeed, the true meet is imminent. Williams raised an eyebrow. The meeting of the three branches only occurs once a decade, and that is because it takes so very long to organise and plan. It is that very planning which, I am sad to say, this meeting is interrupting. All the same, there are matters we must reach consensus on. Giovanni could feel the eyes of the other cardinals flicking between himself and Williams as they spoke, the tension in the air thick enough that a knife would rather break than cut through it. And what matters would those be? Williams asked, his tones suggesting he already knew the answer. Polis. A low groan reverberated through the gathered cardinals, and Giovanni's eye twitched in annoyance from the clear disregard. It was only Pablo's reassuring hand on his shoulder that stopped him from losing his temper then and there. A thin, insincere smile spread across Williams's lips. Polis is well in hand. I disagree, Giovanni said, his voice calm and even. Whether you agree is irrelevant. I am telling you that Polis is well in hand. Cardinal Serra? The cardinal in charge of the Polis situation straightened up in his seat, clearing his throat. Serra was the youngest among the cardinals, but still decades older than Giovanni, the lines on his face betraying his decrepity. He slid a finger across the script in front of him, and the holographic model of the Winterworld Polis appeared hovering over the table. Thus far, Serra said, one hand stroking his little black beard, the humanist quarantine has... Oh, my monitor is deactivated.
You want me to take over?
Could you please? What?
Yes. You fix your monitor. I got this, Arthur. The humanist quarantine has continued without violent incident. A few incoming ships have been turned away, but as I understand, that was accomplished peacefully. Giovanni snorted. I see. So we should be grateful to these trespassers for not being too rough with our people. Kingston, a weaselly little man, spoke up. The Parduma is a dangerous disease, my Apex Bishop. I am afraid with such a substantial infection on Polis, quarantine is required. A quarantine we are well equipped to enact ourselves, Giovanni snapped. The humanists have no right to establish themselves over our people. Well, Kingston continued, bringing his hands. As I understand it, there was concern we were not acting swiftly enough, and a great deal of traffic from Polis does cross over into humanist space. Thus, Williams opened his mouth to speak, and Kingston dutifully shut his. Gertrude Harth wants to see the measure of you, Apex Bishop, he said, his deep voice reverberating through the room. You are still relatively new to your position, an unknown variable. The cat is testing boundaries, seeing what she can get away with. Giovanni's anger reached his peak, and as he squeezed the arms of the throne he sat in, they noticeably cracked and splintered. Well, according to this council, he spat, she can get away with anything. Why don't I just stand up and hand over this throne to her, too? That's where this path ends, after all. Cardinal Alestrio, a balding man with droopy eyes, leaned forward, his hands held out placatingly. I understand the passion of youth, my Apex Bishop. Believe me, I do. But on this occasion, Cooler heads will prevail. We are all children of why. Compromise is not just possible, but inevitable.
1 second. I need to put some atmosphere in here.
Guy. So I see your monitor's been fixed.
Yeah. No, I did it blind.
The temperature seemed to drop. Children of why? Giovanni whispered, his voice deathly quiet. It's pronounced Y, right?
Yeah, the letter Y.
Slowly, he stood up from his throne. As he did, his eyes met those of Captain John Peake of the Vox Day, standing guard by the doors. There was the slightest nod from the soldier. The Superbian faith alone honors the greatness of why, Giovanni said, his voice cold. The humanists masturbate over their own supposed virtue, call the seed by God's name, and think it worship. Watch yourself, boy, Williams said, eyes furious, his own voice just as quiet. Giovanni's voice boomed as he too made his rage known, spreading his arms wide so that his form may be beheld by the gathered counselors. You prayed for me, he declared, eyes narrowing into the most hateful glare of his life. You paid for me! And now that I am here to do my good work, suddenly you protest! Cowardice, incompetence! Sarah's eyes flicked throughout the room before returning to Giovanni's face. He at least seemed to have the good grace to look cautious. Your words are extreme, Apex Bishop, he said carefully. What exactly is it you propose? I forgot that was his voice, sorry. Giovanni looked down his nose at the tiny, pasty man. All that I have said, and you must really ask? We take action against the humanists. We protect our people. We show that we are not afraid to fight for what is rightfully ours. At the far end of the table, Williams leaned back in his seat, and Giovanni could have sworn he saw a wry smirk of amusement on his smug face. Fury bubbled in his veins. I don't think we really need to place this to a vote, Apex Bishop, Williams said, placing his hands on his stomach. Needless to say, the council denies this motion. Was this all you wanted? Giovanni sighed, his fists balled at his sides, and the words he knew he must speak next stuck in his throat. They couldn't be taken back, after all. He looked up at the ceiling. There was the stained glass artwork that had been installed with this venerable room, dome-shaped and encompassing. An image of Y in his galactic form, astral tentacles stretching out into every corner of creation, blessing every form of matter with the privilege of existence. A single great eye, half-lidded, looked back down at Giovanni. An indescribable warmth spread through Giovanni's soul, as though it were being cupped in caring hands. God was with him. Giovanni looked back down to the gathered cardinals, and this time the words came from his lips easily. I believe you've misunderstood, gentlemen. I am not asking for your permission. I am telling you what is going to happen. The room trailed into silence. William's face visibly paled, and several of the other cardinals began to look to each other in worry. On either side of him, Giovanni saw Pablo and Jamie adjust their stances slightly. Not enough to be spotted by mundane eyes, but enough to be ready for whatever might happen next. You intend to ignore us, Williams hissed, outrage burning through every syllable. To ignore the decision of this council? Giovanni nodded. I do. The old man stood up from his seat, the legs of his chair screeching against the ground. Hang on, sorry, there's a lot of phlegm in my throat.
No, Bryce.
You think you can control the sect by yourself, boy? You are a fool. Any control you have passes through us. Do you seriously think our constituents will just do as you say when we tell them how you flaunt our traditions, how you mock our history? Giovanni blinked. Personally, he said, I think it will be difficult for corpses to say anything at all. The silence that followed that was much shorter. It quickly ended when Sarah sprung to his feet, no doubt intending to make a run for it, only to go flying backwards, his chest exploding into red when Jamie blasted him with one of his shotguns. He'd pulled it out and pointed it without anyone even noticing. He might have been eccentric, but the quiet choir had taught him well. The room exploded into violence. The Cardinals made a run for the door, being shut down by Jamie as they ran, and their bodyguards launched attacks at Giovanni's group, Aether surging around all their bodies. They had miscalculated, however. Third verse! Strings of red Aether coalesced around Giovanni's form, and as countless projectiles zoomed towards him, his body automatically moved to dodge each and every one. The throne was utterly annihilated, crumbling into stone, and Pablo raised his reinforced cardbinder to deflect the few attacks that went for him instead. The bodyguards didn't get the chance to launch another attack. The plasma fire from the Vox Dei, those are like the soldiers he brought, right?
Those are the ones that are with him, yeah.
Okay. Who had raised their guns and begun to fire, slammed into their backs, and caught between Giovanni's group and the elite guard, they quickly succumbed into piles of melted flesh and bone. Giovanni stepped down from his elevated platform, making his way past the scorched human refuse, and looked at the pile of bodies that had very nearly reached the door. All 10 of the cardinals lay there, red robes effectively concealing the blood, faces frozen into expressions of utter and eternal idiocy. One of them twitched, just slightly. "Make him kneel, Jamie," Giovanni commanded, and at his call 9 of the bodies began to move, limbs twisting in jerking motions as Jamie's Aether ability took hold. Chalk gray Aether crackled around the walking corpses as they pulled Williams up, the dying man forced onto his knees before Giovanni. Is this related to the Abyss power we saw in Arc 6?
Not necessarily.
Oh, my bad.
Because we saw that...
one of the shots?
It was mentioned in an earlier arc with the Oliphants, because the one that got poisoned, he had a zombie ability that it's not uncommon.
Gotcha. One of the shots had brushed right past his face, scraping away his right eye, and his labored breathing suggested he was not long for this world. But for the moment, he was still alive. You lost your mind, he wheezed. They won't follow you. Giovanni went down on one knee, coming face to face with the dying decrepit. He stared, red eyes cold, right into that pale face. "Captain Peake," he called out to the commander of the Vox Dei, not breaking eye contact with Williams. "The Council have elected to enter seclusion as they deliberate the Polis matter. As dictated by historical precedent, the Apex Bishop will assume direct control of operations until such a time that they decide to return. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Peake saluted, smoke still pouring from the barrel of his rifle. The commander of the Vox Dei had a nervous-looking face, his thin little mustache looking more than a little ridiculous, but Giovanni knew now that it was no indicator of his true nature. He was a true warrior of the faith. Blood dribbled from William's mouth as he slowly shook his head. "Mad!" he gurgled. "You've all gone mad!" "If I am mad, Cardinal," Giovanni said softly, "then it is a madness of your making. You can keep a man in a cage for only so long before he learns the weakness of the bars." Williams moved, lunging towards Giovanni. It was unnecessary. Even as Giovanni responded, he knew there was no need. Williams was dying, and the grip of his fellow corpses was tight. Even if it wasn't, there was nothing he could have done to Giovanni anyway. But Giovanni's body sensed a threat, and so he reacted. "First verse!" Williams' movement ceased immediately, as did his life. In the span of a single second, Giovanni's blood-red aether had coalesced into a long crystalline spear of the same color. The weapon was clutched in Giovanni's hand, the blade stabbing through Williams' eye socket and protruding from the back of his skull. Jamie's zombies released Williams, but the man did not fall. It was only when Giovanni reverted the spear to aether that the corpse crumpled to the floor. His gaze still fixed on Williams' body, Giovanni put a hand to his face, feeling the wetness there that he'd expected. Thin, watery blood was steaming from his eyes like tears, an unusual and unsightly aether tick. He looked up at Peake, nose wrinkled in disgust. He nodded towards the piles of bodies. "Get this out of my sight," he said. "Thank you for bringing back the cool aether ticks. Hi!" Alright, you read the last bit, I'm tired.
Okay. It had been a long and historical day. The second the door to Giovanni's chambers closed behind him, he let out a breath it felt like he'd been holding in for hours. The repercussions of the things he had just done would doubtless echo on for generations, and he was still not done yet. The pressure was enough to make it feel as though his head was caught in a vice. He shrugged off his robes, the freedom of it making him feel like a lizard shedding his skin, and stepped forward as the cleaning automatic dutifully collected his clothing. He stepped towards the mirror, inspecting his reflection carefully. Was that a confident face? A face that had made the right decisions? He couldn't tell. He had learnt long ago not to allow his emotions to show in his face or in his voice unless necessary, and now he couldn't even spot them himself if he didn't want to. He believed that he had done the right thing, but could he be sure? If Isabel and Williams had been right, his rash actions would bring ruin, but... then again, they may simply lack his vision. Staring into mirrors was an inefficient way of spending his time at any rate. Giovanni had learnt a long time ago the proper response to such anxieties. He walked over to the bedside table, opened the drawer there, and pulled out the implement. It was an antique punch-point revolver, its wooden grip accentuated by gold trimming. The dark metal of the barrel gleamed dimly in the light. Over the course of 30 minutes, he disassembled the weapon utterly, polished and oiled each component, peered into it closely to make sure there were no signs of malfunction or erosion. He repaired his weapon many times, and so by this point his movements were as practiced and efficient as his morning routine. Finally, he was satisfied. Reassembling the revolver, he reloaded it with 6 silver bullets. Then, carefully and slowly, he aimed it forward at the mirror and pulled the trigger. Bang! Needless to say, the glass shattered, a cobweb of splinters confirming the weapon's efficacy. Giovanni's reflection was warped by the gunshot too, but he took no mind of it. The mirror would be placed by morning anyway. Satisfied, Giovanni nodded to himself. The weapon was utterly without fault. Then he put the pistol to his own head and pulled the trigger. Click. As always, the gun jammed. A serene smile slowly spread over Giovanni's face. The light glinted off the Sigma tattoo on the back of his hand. God was with him.
Did he not cock it the second time?
No, he did it. Same thing.
There's a trick to it, I know there is. Either way, very interesting. Looks like we're finally getting some final church swag going on here. Very excited to see how this true meat goes.
Shortly will be a meeting of the minds.
What's your lore for this week, buddy?
The Superbian set of the Final Church is very much focused, as you might notice, on saints. There's a lot of focus on sainthood and history. There are over 50,000...
Go ahead.
So there's over 500,000 saints currently registered in sort of their grand index, but only 10,000 or so are sort of active saints at any given time, depending on like the current political status and current moral values. Saints can be made active or inactive.
Really? And does it follow like Catholic saint rules where saints can only be dead people?
No, they can be alive.
Interesting. I feel like Superbian, aside from just the name and the baseline assumption, would gel really well with the supremacy, like that idea of like hero worship with the saints, and like sort of that ideal. I don't know.
The big discrepancy, if you mentioned a couple of times that they don't have as much of a taboo on like the genetic messing around stuff. So right. That's probably a big difference between them, like the mainline supremacy.
Which we've sort of seen with like the whole mention of him being like a genetic clone of Isabella.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Alright, well, thank you guys for listening. This was a long one. This was like 38 minutes. Jesus. Alright, we will see you guys next time, though.
Bye.